developed a brand new flying craft at a secret research facility in northern Germany. Did the Americans and Russians steal that technology after the Second World War? And was it, as many have claimed, a man-made flying saucer?
There were some very strange experimental Nazi aircraft in the air before the war ended.
There could well have been prototype German aircraft that bore some sort of similarity to a flying saucer.
There would have been maybe some kind of flying object in here, inside, that could have taken off vertically.
Perhaps. U.S. military were well aware about the technology of the Germans because they captured a lot of stuff.
The reason the Nazis built these craft were for maintaining their military supremacy.
They didn't hesitate to kill thousands of people in order to keep this secret being a secret.
We were right on the brink of that delivery being made. It could have changed history.
It really is one of the great mysteries of the Second World War. Had the Nazis really developed a craft that was invisible to radar, able to outmaneuver enemy aircraft and travel across the globe at hypersonic speed? I mean, it sounds like something from science fiction, but there are many who believe they came very close.
There was a lot of supposition towards the end of the Second World War that the Nazi Air Force, the Luftwaffe, were experimenting with fighter planes and bombers that were faster and more dangerous than the Hurricane or the Spitfire. They felt that they had got the worst of every aerial battle in which they'd been engaged with our men, and so they were looking for superior weaponry.
I think it's very likely that the Nazis were trying to evolve all sorts of new types of aircraft. We have to remember that at the start of World War II, aircraft design was still, relatively speaking, in its infancy. So new ideas were being tried out all the time. Hitler in particular and the big generals around him were very interested in wonder weapons. And the more desperate they became, the more interested they were in wonder weapons.
The reality is that if they had developed a UFO, then it was too late to turn around their fortunes in the war. But newly released documents and deathbed confessions from scientists involved in top-secret Nazi development paints a picture of a race to develop a supercraft, codenamed Die Glocke, or the Bell, which would have changed the face of history forever. In fact, the idea of the Nazis developing a flying saucer wasn't such a crazy idea at all. They had for years been at the cutting edge of aircraft design, with early prototypes for vertical takeoff jets and even fixed wing and stealth technology.
German engineers were, and still are, among the very best in the world. If they set their hearts and minds on developing, whether it was an aircraft or a submarine, or anything new and unusual and superior to what they considered to be their opponents, then I believe it was within their capabilities that there were some very strange, very unusual, experimental Nazi aircraft in the air before the war ended.
All indications are the Nazis were ahead of all of the Allied nations in terms of technology. First-hand accounts tell us that from as early as the 20s and 30s, their technology far outstripped anything else on the planet.
Further evidence for highly advanced Nazi flying craft came in the form of the so-called Foo Fighters. They were unexplained balls of extremely fast-moving light that started buzzing Allied aircraft over Germany. They were first reported in November 1944, towards the end of the war, and were sometimes seen as single balls of light streaking across the sky in front of Allied aircraft. And sometimes there were many of them flying off, around and under the wings.
There were reports from our airmen and, strangely enough, from the Luftwaffe flyers later on, about these mysterious Foo Fighters, which were faster and which had better armoury and which caused a lot of damage. The whole thing was hushed up for many years, but it looks as though the German designers and developers had produced several experimental machines which were generally called Foo Fighters.
Some pilots described them as resembling Christmas tree lights and reported that they seemed to toy with the aircraft, making wild turns before simply vanishing. Pilots and aircrew reported that the objects flew in formation with their aircraft and behaved as if under intelligent control, as they could never be outmaneuvered or shot down. The phenomenon was so widespread that the military took the sightings seriously, suspecting that the mysterious objects might be secret German weapons.
It appears that the Nazis built advanced, technologically superior flying machines for purposes of military supremacy. However, their radical design led them to be interpreted as being of extraterrestrial origins.
The fact that the Foo Fighters appeared at the time when the Nazis were experimenting with this kind of craft is enormously suggestive that the Foo Fighters were actually the German craft, perhaps remote-controlled. I wouldn't say it's proof positive, because it depends what you think of all the other UFO reports that have come out since then. If they're extraterrestrial craft, they could have been buzzing around then. But it's certainly suggestive, and it certainly ties in with the idea that these were actually kind of Nazi secret aircraft.
From 1944 onwards, the Allies all but obliterated the Nazi industrial heartland in northern Germany. So it's believed that Hitler and his high command made the decision to move their most sensitive and secret projects, including the UFO development, out of the front line and down to what is now the area of Wrocław in southwest Poland, on the border of Czechoslovakia. It was remote, mountainous, and out of the way. They constructed a huge underground facility called Die Riese, or the Giant, in what today is known as the Owl Mountains. It was a series of interconnected bases built deep into the mountains, safe from aerial detection or bombs. Different facilities developed different top-secret flying craft and weapons. This ensured that if any one base was discovered or compromised, then the others could still continue. The codename for the project was Lothar, and according to intelligence documents seized by the Allies after the war, it became the highest priority for the German command from 1944 onwards. They were developing something that they believed could win the war.
The Nazis had been so brutally bombed by the Allied forces. All of their infrastructure was under threat, all of their discoveries, so they had no choice. They made a conscious decision. We need to move this the heck out of here, and so they moved it to southern Poland.
They were actually delving into mountains. They were making bunkers of a kind that no bombs of that period would be able to do more than scratch the surface. And from Hitler's point of view, it was the cleverest thing he could have done with his production machinery and with his, dawning rocketry. He wanted it safe from the RAF, and he got it as safe as he could.
The Nazis abandoned the underground facilities in the last weeks of the war, but the remains of Die Riese are still there deep inside the Owl Mountains, although much of the complex has either collapsed over time or become flooded. A Warsaw-based military historian and journalist, Igor Witowski, who has been researching the top-secret projects, agreed to take me into two of the remaining facilities which are still accessible. The first one is known as the Ashuku base, and it's believed to have been the home of Die Glocke, or the Bell UFO.
We are going to one of the underground facilities in the western Poland, which is called Riese. It is part of a very large complex that the Germans were building here during the war, and it was one of the most secret, if not the most secret, undertaking of the SS, because I have written it literally in a document. It was something of very high priority.
You think they were building some kind of flying craft there?
There is a construction which resembles a test rig for vertically taking off and landing crafts. And there are also testimonies of some witnesses from the time of the war, former prisoners which worked here, and they have described some objects hovering noiselessly in the air.
As we drove deep into the mountains, I really wasn't sure what to expect. Is it possible that the Nazis really had built some sort of UFO out here? And if so, what would this underground facility look like?
And so was this a mine before, Igor, or did the Germans build it?
It was built as a, you know, armament facility or command post, or anyway, typically wartime facility.
Right, okay.
Okay. And
when did they start building it?
They started to build it in 1943. It was built essentially by the prisoners of a concentration camp, which was located close here.
Okay. So what would have happened here in this facility?
According to one of the prisoners, which had access to German documents, it would be a final assembly line.
Right. And what would have been in here? These sort of windows here. Oh, is that a machine gun in it?
These underground structures in Poland and in that area were quite phenomenal. There were hundreds, thousands of slave laborers digging away into the heart of the mountain to create this impregnable underground city. And the defenses outside, should an Allied army have landed there and attempted to get inside, the way the gun emplacements were ready to mow down any infantry who were approaching this underground city's entrance. And it was inside those impregnable labyrinths in the mountain that the Germans were continuing to develop their advanced aircraft and all of the other new weapons that Hitler had ordered.
Okay, you can kind of imagine this place being full of German soldiers. What's this here?
These are remnants of various kinds of armament that was used by the SS and was found after the war in the vicinity.
And so these are rifles, are they?
Rifles, barrels, everything grassy.
What are these?
Panzerfaust anti-tank grenade launchers, for example. This is a magazine.
Yeah, it's a shell there.
A shell, yeah.
It was an eerie place, with a network of tunnels leading to guard rooms, weapon stores, and even a telephone exchange, all slowly rusting and rotting away underground.
I think they were experimenting with new designs to see what they could do, to see how fast it could be, how high they could go, whether they could evade radar or not show up on radar. I don't know they necessarily knew that any of those things were going to achieve any of those things, but they were going to try it out and find out.
And tell me more about the bell.
The bell was a device which was in the shape of the bell, but it was a kind of accelerator. There were two drums or cylinders inside, which were spinning during an experiment at opposite direction with very high speeds. And it was something that was emitting very harmful radiations of various kinds. And the bell was tested underground in special underground chambers, probably as the one that we can see here. It was a device 4 or 5 meters tall, so it would take a significant portion of such a hole.
And so these are top secret experiments that the Nazis are carrying out in these tunnels?
Yes, these experiments were so top secret that the entire facility where it has been tested has been blocked.
Fundamentally, the deglocker, or the bell, was full of certain deadly radioactive materials in order to make it do what they were hoping it would do. And a number of the top scientists and technologists who were working on it in the experimental stage died of radiation poisoning. It was, in a double sense, a potentially deadly weapon.
According to plans discovered at the end of the war, the bell was actually the propulsion device for a powerful vertical takeoff craft, which had 2 large discs rotating inside a cylindrical outer shell. It was these discs, powered by a huge energy force, possibly radioactive, that gave the craft its vertical lift. Whether it was a flying craft or just a flying bomb, we don't know.
So essentially, these are like giant underground science labs.
Yes, the entire undertaking was to be a conglomerate of industrial research facilities, command posts, something like research laboratories combined with an arsenal of the last resort that they could use to win the war, even in 1945 or late 1944. So it was to be, everything was supposed to be connected with each other, all the parts. And in all, it would be the size of a small or medium-sized city.
One of the things that we need to remember about that stage of the war was the tremendous technological difference between these experimental planes, these new mysterious machines, some disc-shaped, some flying wings, and all kinds of experiments. This, I think, is where they got ahead of us. They were prepared under that central leadership where Hitler said he wanted something, and by thunder, they did it.
Was this some kind of UFO they were trying to build?
What I can say, and what can be verified, and what is substantiated by the documents that they have found, is that they did work on an exotic propulsion system, linking gravity with quantum physics, for example. And for this can be proven.
So the Nazis were trying to develop anti-gravity propulsion. Is that what we're saying?
Yes, it is. To this day, it is the most likely hypothesis. Over here, I will show you some of the German equipment left by the Germans here.
Oh, okay.
In the vicinity of this underground facility. You can see helmets, gas masks, anti-tank grenade launcher. Yes, it's all rusty stuff, but.
So this was all equipment that was abandoned when they left the
yes,
facility?
they have left here quite a lot of it.
It's amazing.
This is a barrel from a machine gun.
Yeah.
MG34.
Shell casings here.
Yes.
Wow.
88 millimeters.
Yeah. Was that from a tank, or would that have been a?
From a tank or anti-aircraft gun.
Right. Gas masks.
Gas masks. Yes.
It's quite clear that the Germans were terrified that the Allies would discover what they were doing down here.
Yes, they were guarding this secret very, very carefully, and one of the evidence for this is that the number of the counterintelligence officers here was record-breaking, around 100 of them, which was unusual because normally it would be 1 or 2 or 3 officers. And the other evidence for this is that for the secrecy, is that none of the prisoners that were working in the finished parts of the complex have survived, which means that they didn't hesitate to kill thousands of people in order to keep this secret being a secret.
It's hard to describe the feeling when you walk around this underground base, but a general sense of dread would probably come closest. It's cold, damp, and you can feel the fear and hatred inside the vast tunnels and chambers. Not surprising, really, when you realize that over 40,000 people died down here. Take it from me, this is a truly disturbing place. If the Nazis did actually build flying saucers, then an Austrian scientist called Victor Schauberger was probably one of the leading lights behind it. In 1934, it's reported that Schauberger and other scientists were summoned to Berlin to meet Hitler and start work on an exotic flying craft. Their work had unlimited funding and would be carried out in total secrecy. After the war, documents discovered by Allied intelligence show that the scientists did in fact have some success.
Victor Schauberger is a Nazi technologist who had this motto of observe and copy nature. He came up with the first, what was called the repulsion craft, the first craft that had the ability to have completely vertical liftoff. So he succeeded in this basic tabletop design of vertical liftoff, and instantly the Nazis got right behind him.
Once Hitler knew that on a small scale, such a machine had been able to defy gravity, as he was thinking of it, then all the resources went in so that Schauberger could make one that was big enough to take men, to take bombs, to take anything that the Fuhrer wanted.
It seems very likely to me that the Germans were trying to evolve a craft that was capable of vertical takeoff. I mean, that was kind of like the holy grail of aviation during the war. As the war went on, this would become even more important, of course, because more and more runways on aerodromes were being bombed, and it would be much better to support ground troops if you could have vertical takeoff aircraft.
It's fair to say that the Allies strongly suspected, and maybe even had hard evidence, of a top-secret development program that explained the multiple sightings of unidentified craft in the skies. So when the Nazi regime finally fell in 1945, the Russians and the Americans were very keen to get their hands on the data, the documents, and the scientists behind it. The Americans set up a top-secret operation to bring as many Nazi scientists to the US as possible. It was codenamed Paperclip.
Come the end of the war, there was an incredible competition, I mean, a frenzied competition to gain access to the individuals who were the brains behind Germany's leading technological elite. So Russia wanted them, everybody wanted them, and ironically, the US, one of the Allied forces, was victorious in obtaining them.
They extracted Werner von Braun, who became chief scientist at NASA, developed the Saturn V rocket, and this is a man that developed rockets that bombed London initially. So it was a race. It wasn't just a race to capture Berlin, it was a race to get technology.
At the end of the war, the Allies seized something like more than 2 million of patents from the German industry. These patents were given for free to the private industries in Germany, in France, in the UK, and of course in Russia. And it was a fantastic booty.
In fact, there were both Russian and American flying saucer projects that were developed after the war. The Russian project was called Tarielka, and the American one was a joint effort with the Canadians called the Avrocar.
In 1953, the international press came up with an astounding news. Canadians were working on a flying saucer. Actually, the Avro aviation company in Canada was funded by the Americans to develop a disc-shaped aircraft.
Both vehicles were modified one for further static and flight testing at the Avro facility, and the other for tests in the 40 by 80 foot tunnel at Ames Research Center.
The Americans invested a lot of money, not so much, but a good amount of money, and the Canadians developed the disk pretty slowly, and a few years later they came up with a test craft. And there is some footage about that. You see something like an overcraft jumping over the ground, about 2 meters over the ground, with very, very poor performances. And after that, the Americans realized that the money was completely wasted, and so they canceled the project. But there is another story. Many think that that was a conspiracy, that Avro car was just a poor craft shown to the public to demonstrate that the project failed. But behind the scenes, there was another project successfully making a real flying saucer with top performances. That no one knows about that, of course.
The second facility Igor wanted to take me to was called Sobon, and unlike Ashuku, it was a base which had both above and below ground facilities, including what Igor thought could have been a huge stone test rig for a vertical liftoff craft, maybe even a man-made UFO codenamed Die Hannenbau.
Wow, look at this. What's this for?
I'm not sure what it was, but the closest analogy is to a circular test rig for objects taking off and landing vertically. This is general rule that one builds such a test rig for testing helicopters or drones taking off vertically. So it might have been for testing some flying object, because it doesn't fit any other explanation, in fact.
So let me just get this straight. So what, there would have been maybe some kind of flying object in here?
Inside.
That could have taken off vertically?
Perhaps. That's one of the explanations.
The base was run by the elite SS troops, who maintained the highest level of security. In fact, the entire valley that surrounded it was sealed off, with thousands of soldiers, roadblocks and gun emplacements. Historians have nicknamed it the Nazi Area 51.
So whatever it was that the Nazis were doing here, whatever experiments they were doing here, they wanted to make sure that no one got anywhere near it.
Not only that, but also, despite the fact that thousands of prisoners were working here, mostly underground, obviously, no one of them has survived.
Why is that?
It's just because they were, according to the German nomenclature, bearers of the secrets. So they had no right, physically, to leave this place anytime. If they came here, they were sentenced to remain here forever.
So they came here to work and they came here to die?
Exactly.
If the Nazis had developed an anti-gravity propulsion, what would the craft that would be propelled by this look like? Describe it to me.
The craft probably would have been circular and more or less flat, because that's the extrapolation of the geometry of the fields surrounding such a device. It could be a kind of a saucer-like, a disc-like, but it might have been a ball, for example. And this links this research project with the Foo Fighters, for example, which were certainly, we may say, because there is a lot of documents on it, we may say with absolute certainty that the Germans were manufacturing strange flying machines, crafts, which were able to perform maneuvers which were impossible to perform for any conventional machines.
You say they were working underground. What's underneath us here?
We are over the center of the former mine, which was taken over by the SS. And it was a huge underground facility, which they transformed into a war or research-related facility, codenamed Lothar. And it was so huge that the underground space here was the order of 20 million cubic meters. So it was something that has, again, has no equivalent anywhere in the world, as with the security.
So underneath where we're stood now was a giant science laboratory.
Giant science, but also industrial complex. Scientific and industrial complex, and there are reasons to believe, such as testimonies of the German prisoners of war, that the bell was tested here, and it was dedicated to the most secret research project carried out in the Third Reich during the entire war.
It would be very different from the traditional UFOs, largely because of the shape and because we're never quite certain whether it was intended to project something else, or, in other words, was it a launching device with all that mysterious power inside it, or was it itself capable of flying and delivering heaven knows what toxic compounds on the enemy?
Needless to say, the Allies took the whole Nazi UFO phenomena very seriously indeed. The Foo Fighters might just be harmless lights in the sky buzzing aircraft. But if the Nazis had developed some exotic hypersonic craft, which could evade not only aircraft, but also radar, then it might have been possible for these craft to deliver a crushing payload to destroy London or even New York and Washington, D.C. As darkness fell, Igor took me into the tunnels beneath the base.
The tunnels through here, huh?
Yes, this is the entrance to the network of tunnels above the former mine, codenamed Lothar. And I'm just going to show you the tunnels. Yes, the door is original. It's all original here.
Wow.
This is actually a newly discovered part of the underground system.
Okay. Go through here?
Yes.
Thank you. So this is pretty much as it would have been, huh?
Yes. Yes. It's in perfect condition.
Yeah.
They have used very good materials here.
Yeah. And how long does this just go on for?
For many kilometers.
Really?
For many kilometers. For example, this tunnel which leads here, it stretches for 1.5 kilometers, and there is a rockfall at the end of it.
Should we go down here?
What is strange, it leads under the test rig, under the henge.
Right.
And what you can see here, these niches on the left, on the wall,
right,
are for high voltage cables, which were so powerful that one such a cable could power an entire small-sized city.
And why did they need so much power down here?
I'm just going to show you one of such a cables. You know, it's tremendous. It's very heavy, very heavy.
It's just a power cable.
Yes, and it's a sign that's telling us that what was going on underground had a purely industrial or research purpose, and that there was something very large down there. What they were doing here was something much larger, which incorporated all these facilities, research posts, and so on. It was codenamed Sonderbauvorhaben S3, which means Special Construction Undertaking S3. And it is written in the document that it was the most important such an undertaking of the SS during the entire war. They were planning to make a giant underground complex the size of a city. And probably it would be something serving the production and research of the strategic weapons of a completely new kind. Something that would give them a victory in the war.
So you're saying this was the most significant secret project that the Nazis carried out during the war?
Yes, I also have a document which says that the project on which they worked was officially described, it wasn't a nickname, it was official reference in documents as something that will change the course of war, decisive for the war.
Just imagine if those hyper-fast German craft could have reached Moscow, could have reached London, could have reached New York. What would have happened? We were right on the brink of that delivery being made. It could have changed history.
Where does this take us?
This would take us under the center of the henge of the test rig.
Right.
It goes just under the center and goes further to the power plant.
And so down here was where they would have carried out their experiments, huh?
On a deeper level, yes, but generally here. This is the same complex.
Right.
In the last stages of World War II, Nazis developed a wealth of very, very advanced, even exotic projects in aviation and rocketry. There are hundreds of different blueprints for even very bizarre airplanes, and most of them were jet-propelled, and they were something completely different from the technology that the Allies had in their hands at that time.
By definition, a UFO means an unidentified flying object. But most people these days take a UFO to mean a flying saucer or an interstellar spacecraft of some sort. If we're talking about the real meaning of UFO, then clearly the Nazis, like the Allies, were indulging in that kind of behaviour.
I think the main thing they were after was a vertical takeoff craft, because obviously that meant you didn't need runways and things like that. But they're obviously looking for fighters. The size of the craft that they were experimenting with seems to indicate they were thinking in terms of fighters rather than bombers, because they couldn't actually carry lots of heavy bombs. But that's exactly what they needed at that stage. You know, they needed something that would be able to shoot down the Allied bombers that were completely obliterating Germany then.
I think the Nazis were undoubtedly playing around with new technology at the time, propulsion technologies, and magnetic technologies as well. And I think what we've done is we've added the word UFO post, you know, and so it fits a nice picture of what we see today. But I don't think they were building what they thought as interstellar craft. These were new technologies at the time.
Blocked up?
Yes, that's as far as we can go. There is we can feel the current of the air, so it leads somewhere. We may be sure of that, but
and that's a shame, because whatever they were working on is further down behind this block
yes,
wall.
it's Lothar.
I think I can see a UFO down there.
So, did the Nazis really build UFOs, or was it clever cover for something else? The evidence seems to point to a highly classified flying craft with an exotic propulsion system, and when you consider the lengths that they went to hide their test facilities, it was obviously something of paramount importance. I'll see you next time.